Question 1. Risk assessment procedures indicate a potential for unauthorized disclosure of sensitive client information if immediate action is not taken to respond to a senior executive's urgent request for data. The executive has stated they need all relevant client performance metrics for an upcoming, high-stakes meeting. Which of the following actions best navigates this situation while adhering to professional and regulatory standards? Option A. Provide a summary of general client performance trends without including any specific client identifiers or detailed metrics, citing data privacy concerns. Option B. Forward the request to a junior team member to gather the data, as they are more familiar with the day-to-day client metrics. Option C. Politely inform the executive that you cannot provide the requested information without further clarification on the specific metrics needed and the intended use, and offer to discuss the requirements to ensure compliance. Option D. Immediately compile and send all available client performance metrics to the executive, as their request is from a senior stakeholder. The correct answer is D. Immediately compile and send all available client performance metrics to the executive, as their request is from a senior stakeholder. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the ethical and regulatory obligations to protect client confidentiality and data privacy. The pressure to provide a swift response to a senior stakeholder can lead to shortcuts that violate established protocols. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any information shared is done so appropriately and with the necessary authorizations. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it adheres to the principle of least privilege and data protection regulations. By seeking clarification on the specific data required and the intended use, the professional ensures that only necessary and authorized information is disclosed. This aligns with the ethical duty to maintain client confidentiality and the regulatory requirements, assuming a jurisdiction like the UK with GDPR principles that mandate data minimization and purpose limitation. It demonstrates a commitment to responsible data handling and risk mitigation. An incorrect approach that involves immediately providing all available client data without verification or authorization fails to uphold client confidentiality and data privacy principles. This could lead to a breach of contract, regulatory penalties under data protection laws, and significant reputational damage. It demonstrates a lack of understanding of data governance and a disregard for the potential misuse of sensitive information. Another incorrect approach, which is to refuse to provide any information whatsoever without further explanation, while prioritizing confidentiality, can be professionally detrimental. It fails to acknowledge the legitimate business needs of senior stakeholders and can create an adversarial relationship. While it avoids a data breach, it does not demonstrate effective problem-solving or collaboration, which are crucial for professional effectiveness. It misses an opportunity to educate the stakeholder on appropriate data access protocols. A third incorrect approach, which is to share the information with a colleague for them to decide, outsources responsibility without proper delegation or authorization. This can lead to inconsistent application of policies and potentially still result in an unauthorized disclosure if the colleague is not fully aware of the implications or lacks the authority to approve the release. It undermines accountability and can create confusion regarding who is ultimately responsible for data protection. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding the request, assessing its legitimacy and scope, consulting relevant policies and procedures, seeking necessary approvals, and then acting with due diligence. This framework involves active listening, critical thinking, adherence to ethical codes, and knowledge of applicable regulations. When in doubt, escalating the request to a supervisor or compliance officer is a prudent step. Question 2. Which approach would be most aligned with responsible business practices and stakeholder management principles when evaluating a new product launch that has potential environmental implications? Option A. Proceed with the launch based on existing regulatory compliance, without proactively seeking input from affected parties. Option B. Focus exclusively on meeting shareholder expectations for rapid return on investment, with minimal consideration for external impacts. Option C. Conduct a thorough environmental impact assessment and engage with community representatives to address concerns before finalizing the launch strategy. Option D. Prioritize the sales team's projections for immediate revenue generation, assuming environmental concerns can be managed post-launch. Correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough environmental impact assessment and engage with community representatives to address concerns before finalizing the launch strategy. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in business where a project's success hinges on the satisfaction of diverse stakeholders with potentially conflicting interests. The challenge lies in balancing these interests to achieve a sustainable and ethical outcome, rather than prioritizing short-term gains or the demands of a single dominant group. The professional difficulty arises from the need to navigate these competing priorities, maintain transparency, and ensure that decisions align with the company's overarching strategic goals and ethical commitments, all while adhering to the Genpact hiring assessment test's implied regulatory framework, which emphasizes fairness and responsible business conduct. Correct approach analysis. The approach that prioritizes a balanced consideration of all stakeholder groups, including employees, customers, investors, and the wider community, represents best professional practice. This aligns with principles of corporate social responsibility and ethical governance, which are increasingly embedded in regulatory expectations for responsible business operations. By actively seeking to understand and address the needs and concerns of each group, the company fosters trust, enhances its reputation, and builds long-term value. This holistic perspective ensures that decisions are not only financially sound, but also ethically defensible and sustainable, minimizing potential risks associated with neglecting any key stakeholder group. Incorrect approach is analysis. Prioritizing only the immediate demands of the sales team, while seemingly beneficial for short-term revenue, fails to consider the potential negative impact on employee morale and long-term customer relationships. This approach risks alienating other crucial stakeholders and could lead to reputational damage and future revenue loss. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of fairness and a disregard for the well-being of employees and the trust of customers. Focusing solely on maximizing short-term shareholder profits without considering the broader impact on other stakeholders can lead to decisions that are detrimental to the company's long-term health and its social license to operate. This narrow focus can result in unethical practices, such as cutting corners on quality or employee benefits, which may violate implicit ethical guidelines and could attract regulatory scrutiny if they lead to harm or unfair practices. Ignoring the concerns of the local community in favor of operational efficiency overlooks the importance of maintaining positive community relations, which can be vital for a company's sustained success, and can be implicitly guided by ethical considerations of corporate citizenship. Such an approach can lead to public backlash, operational disruptions, and damage to the company's brand, demonstrating a failure to act as a responsible corporate citizen. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a stakeholder-centric decision-making framework. This involves 1. Identifying all relevant stakeholders and understanding their interests, concerns, and potential impact. 2. Evaluating the potential consequences of different decisions on each stakeholder group. 3. Seeking to find solutions that create shared value or minimize harm across all groups. 4. Communicating transparently with stakeholders about decisions and their rationale. 5. Regularly reviewing and adapting strategies based on evolving stakeholder needs and feedback, always within the bounds of ethical conduct and applicable regulations. Question 3. The review process indicates that a financial advisor, who is responsible for recommending investment products to clients, has a close personal relationship with the CEO of a company whose shares are being considered for inclusion in a client's portfolio. The advisor has not disclosed this relationship to their firm's compliance department. What is the most appropriate course of action for the financial advisor in this situation? Option A. Inform the client directly about the personal relationship and allow the client to decide if they are comfortable with the recommendation. Option B. Discreetly research the company further to ensure the investment is sound before making any recommendation, thereby minimizing any perceived bias. Option C. Proceed with the investment recommendation if they genuinely believe it is in the client's best interest, as personal relationships should not dictate professional judgment. Option D. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to the firm's compliance department and seek guidance on how to manage or mitigate any potential conflict of interest. The correct answer is D. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to the firm's compliance department and seek guidance on how to manage or mitigate any potential conflict of interest. Explanation. The review process indicates a potential conflict of interest scenario, which is a common and professionally challenging area in financial services. The challenge lies in identifying and managing situations where an individual's personal interests could improperly influence their professional judgment or actions, potentially leading to regulatory breaches and reputational damage. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between acceptable business practices and those that create an unacceptable risk of bias. The correct approach, which involves disclosing the potential conflict to the relevant compliance department and seeking guidance on managing or mitigating it, represents best professional practice. This aligns with regulatory requirements and ethical codes that mandate transparency and proactive management of conflicts of interest. By reporting the situation, the individual ensures that the firm can assess the risk and implement appropriate controls, thereby upholding regulatory obligations and maintaining client trust. An incorrect approach of proceeding without disclosure risks, violating regulations that require the identification and management of conflicts of interest. This could lead to disciplinary action, fines, and damage to the firm's reputation. Another incorrect approach of downplaying the significance of the relationship or its potential impact is also professionally unacceptable, as it demonstrates a lack of diligence and a failure to adhere to the spirit of regulatory compliance. This can be seen as an attempt to circumvent established procedures, which is ethically unsound and can lead to severe consequences. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency and adherence to established policies. When faced with a potential conflict of interest, the process should involve 1. Recognizing the potential conflict. 2. Understanding the firm's internal policies and relevant regulations regarding conflicts of interest. 3. Disclosing the situation to the appropriate authority, e.g., compliance department. 4. Cooperating with the authority to determine the appropriate course of action, which may include recusal, divestment, or enhanced oversight. This systematic approach ensures that potential risks are identified, managed, and mitigated in accordance with regulatory and ethical standards. Question 4. Market research demonstrates that a significant portion of potential investors are hesitant to invest in companies with a history of product recalls, even if those recalls were for minor issues. Your company is preparing to release its annual report, and a recent, albeit minor, product recall has occurred. Management is concerned that highlighting this recall prominently in the report might deter investors. They are considering framing the recall in a way that emphasizes the company's proactive approach to safety while downplaying the frequency and potential impact. What is the most ethically and professionally sound approach to addressing the recent product recall in the annual report? Option A. Omit any mention of the product recall from the annual report to avoid negatively influencing investor sentiment and focus solely on the company's positive financial performance and growth prospects. Option B. Delay the release of the annual report until after the product recall issue has been fully resolved and its impact has been minimized, then present a more polished narrative to investors. Option C. Include a brief, vague mention of operational adjustments in the report that alludes to the recall without explicitly stating it, allowing investors to infer the situation if they conduct further independent research. Option D. Disclose the product recall factually and transparently in the annual report, providing necessary context about the issue, the steps taken to address it, and the potential impact, while also highlighting the company's commitment to product safety and quality control processes. The correct answer is D. Disclose the product recall factually and transparently in the annual report, providing necessary context about the issue, the steps taken to address it, and the potential impact, while also highlighting the company's commitment to product safety and quality control processes. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire for positive public perception and the ethical obligation to disclose accurate, potentially negative, information. The pressure to present a favorable image can lead to the temptation to downplay or omit crucial details that might deter investors or customers. Careful judgment is required to balance business interests with transparency and integrity. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes honesty and adherence to regulatory disclosure requirements. In the context of financial reporting and investor relations, which are heavily regulated, misrepresenting or omitting material information is a direct violation of ethical principles and often specific regulations designed to protect investors and market integrity. Upholding transparency builds trust and long-term credibility, which are invaluable assets. An incorrect approach that involves selectively highlighting positive aspects while omitting negative ones fails to meet the standard of full and fair disclosure. This can be considered misleading and may violate regulations requiring the disclosure of all material information that could influence an investor's decision. Another incorrect approach, which is to delay the release of negative information until a more opportune moment, can also be seen as an attempt to manipulate market perception and may be viewed as a form of market manipulation or insider trading if based on non-public information. A third incorrect approach, which is to dismiss the negative feedback as insignificant without proper investigation, demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for potential risks that could impact stakeholders. This failure to investigate can lead to overlooking systemic issues that require attention and correction, thereby exposing the company and its stakeholders to greater harm. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core ethical and regulatory obligations. This involves understanding the relevant codes of conduct, company policies, and applicable laws. Next, they should assess the potential impact of different courses of action on all stakeholders, including investors, customers, employees, and the company's reputation. Seeking advice from legal counsel or compliance officers is crucial when navigating complex ethical dilemmas. Finally, the decision should be based on principles of integrity, transparency, and accountability, ensuring that actions align with both legal requirements and ethical standards. Question 5. The control framework reveals a potential operational risk related to a new software implementation. While the implementation is proceeding, detailed performance metrics and user adoption rates are not yet fully available. Which approach to assessing this risk is most aligned with best professional practice and regulatory expectations for proactive risk management? Option A. For a comprehensive risk assessment until all performance metrics and user adoption data are fully collected and analyzed, ensuring a complete quantitative picture. Option B. Conduct a qualitative assessment only of risks that can be immediately quantified with available data, ignoring those with less tangible metrics. Option C. Focus the risk assessment solely on historical data from previous software implementations, assuming similar risk profiles. Option D. Prioritize assessing the risk based on the potential impact on business continuity and the estimated likelihood of disruption, even with incomplete data, and plan for iterative refinement as more metrics become available. The correct answer is D. Prioritize assessing the risk based on the potential impact on business continuity and the estimated likelihood of disruption, even with incomplete data, and plan for iterative refinement as more metrics become available. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a nuanced understanding of risk assessment methodologies beyond simple identification. The challenge lies in selecting the most appropriate approach when faced with incomplete or ambiguous data, and when the potential impact of a risk is not immediately quantifiable. Careful judgment is required to balance the need for timely action with the desire for comprehensive analysis. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a proactive and iterative risk assessment process. By focusing on the potential impact and likelihood, even with limited data, it allows for the early identification of significant risks that could affect the organization's objectives. This aligns with regulatory expectations that emphasize a forward-looking and risk-based approach to controls and compliance. It demonstrates a commitment to understanding the what-if scenarios and their potential consequences, which is a cornerstone of effective risk management. An incorrect approach that relies solely on historical data without considering emerging trends or potential future events is professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a lack of foresight and an over-reliance on past performance, which may not be indicative of future outcomes. It can lead to regulatory breaches if new or evolving risks are not adequately identified and mitigated. Another incorrect approach that focuses only on risks with readily available quantitative data overlooks potentially significant qualitative risks. This can result in a skewed perception of the risk landscape, leaving the organization vulnerable to threats that are harder to measure, but can have substantial reputational or operational consequences. This approach fails to meet the comprehensive nature of risk assessment expected by regulators. A third incorrect approach that delays assessment until all data is perfectly available is also professionally unsound. This leads to inaction and missed opportunities for mitigation. In a dynamic business environment, waiting for perfect information can mean that risks materialize before any controls are in place, leading to significant losses and potential regulatory scrutiny for a lack of due diligence. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Understanding the objective. What is the risk assessment trying to achieve? 2. Identifying available information. What data is present and what are its limitations? 3. Considering potential impacts. What are the consequences if the risk materializes both quantitatively and qualitatively? 4. Assessing likelihood. Even with limited data, can a reasonable estimation of probability be made? 5. Prioritizing. Focus on risks with the highest potential impact, even if likelihood is uncertain. 6. Iteration. Recognize that risk assessment is an ongoing process and be prepared to refine assessments as more information becomes available. Question 6. During the evaluation of financial data for a key client, a Genpact analyst identifies a series of unusual transactions that deviate significantly from the client's historical patterns and industry norms. While the transactions are not definitively fraudulent, they raise serious concerns about potential money laundering activities or other regulatory breaches. The analyst is unsure of the exact nature of the issue, but believes it warrants further attention. Which of the following actions represents the most appropriate and professionally responsible course of action for the Genpact analyst? Option A. Conduct a preliminary, informal investigation by discreetly inquiring about the transactions with colleagues in other departments who may have had tangential dealings with the client. Option B. Escalate the findings and concerns through Genpact's internal compliance and risk management channels for a formal review and investigation. Option C. Immediately report the suspicions and findings to the client's primary point of contact at Genpact, requesting clarification on the unusual transactions. Option D. Document the discrepancies internally for personal reference, but take no further action unless explicitly instructed to do so by the client. The correct answer is C. Immediately report the suspicions and findings to the client's primary point of contact at Genpact, requesting clarification on the unusual transactions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between client confidentiality and the obligation to report potential financial misconduct. The Genpact employee is tasked with identifying discrepancies, but the nature of the discrepancies, if they indicate fraud or regulatory breaches, necessitates a careful and compliant response. The challenge lies in balancing the duty of loyalty to the client with the broader responsibility to uphold regulatory integrity and prevent harm. Misjudging the situation could lead to severe consequences, including legal penalties, reputational damage for both the individual and Genpact, and a breach of trust with the client. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a structured, internal reporting mechanism that prioritizes thorough investigation and adherence to established protocols. This aligns with professional ethical standards and regulatory expectations for financial services firms. By escalating the findings through the designated channels, e.g., compliance department, internal audit, the employee ensures that the matter is handled by individuals with the appropriate expertise and authority to investigate further, make informed decisions, and take necessary actions in accordance with relevant regulations. This process safeguards client confidentiality while fulfilling the obligation to address potential misconduct appropriately. It demonstrates a commitment to due diligence and responsible corporate citizenship. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves directly confronting the client with the suspicions without prior internal consultation or investigation. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses established internal controls and reporting lines, potentially jeopardizing a formal investigation, tipping off individuals involved in misconduct, and violating client confidentiality protocols. It also exposes the employee and Genpact to legal risks if the suspicions are unfounded or mishandled. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the discrepancies, assuming they are minor or a simple error. This is a failure of professional duty and ethical responsibility. Regulatory frameworks often mandate reporting of suspicious activities, and inaction can be construed as complicity or negligence, leading to significant penalties. It undermines the integrity of financial reporting and the trust placed in financial professionals. A third incorrect approach is to discuss the suspicions with colleagues outside of the formal reporting structure. This constitutes a breach of confidentiality and can lead to the spread of unsubstantiated rumors, damaging reputations, and potentially hindering any future official investigation. It also bypasses the controlled communication channels designed to manage sensitive information. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should adopt a systematic decision-making process. First, they must understand their organization's internal policies and procedures for reporting suspicious activities. Second, they should meticulously document their findings without making premature judgments. Third, they must escalate the matter through the designated internal channels, such as compliance or legal departments, allowing these departments to conduct a thorough investigation. This approach ensures that actions are taken within a legally and ethically sound framework, protecting all parties involved while upholding regulatory compliance. Question 7. Process analysis reveals that during a critical client data transformation project, an analyst encounters unexpected and significant discrepancies between the source data and the transformed dataset. The project deadline is rapidly approaching, and the analyst feels pressure to complete the analysis promptly. The analyst has the option to either proceed with the analysis using the transformed data, making assumptions to account for the discrepancies, or to meticulously document the transformation process, including any manual adjustments made to reconcile the data before proceeding. Option A. Proceed with the analysis by making educated guesses about the nature of the discrepancies and how they might be resolved without formal documentation. Option B. Ignore the discrepancies and submit the analysis based on the transformed data as is, prioritizing the completion of the project by the deadline. Option C. Meticulously document the entire data transformation process, including any manual adjustments or validations performed to reconcile the discrepancies, and then proceed with the analysis. Option D. Proceed with the data analysis using the transformed data, making reasonable assumptions to account for the identified discrepancies without further investigation. The correct answer is C. Meticulously document the entire data transformation process, including any manual adjustments or validations performed to reconcile the discrepancies, and then proceed with the analysis. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge in balancing the need for efficient data processing with the imperative to maintain data integrity and comply with Genpact's internal data handling policies, which are designed to prevent errors and ensure accuracy. The pressure to meet tight deadlines can tempt individuals to bypass established protocols, leading to potential data corruption or misinterpretation. Careful judgment is required to identify the most robust and compliant method for handling the data, even under time constraints. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves meticulously documenting the data transformation process, including any manual adjustments or validations performed. This aligns with best practices in data management and Genpact's commitment to auditable processes. By creating a clear audit trail, any discrepancies or errors can be traced back to their source, facilitating correction and preventing recurrence. This adherence to documentation ensures transparency, accountability, and compliance with internal quality standards, which are paramount in a professional services environment like Genpact. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with the data analysis without thoroughly investigating the identified discrepancies. This is professionally unacceptable as it risks generating inaccurate insights and recommendations, undermining the credibility of the analysis, and potentially leading to flawed business decisions for the client. It violates the ethical obligation to provide accurate and reliable information. Another incorrect approach is to make assumptions about the nature of the discrepancies and proceed with the analysis based on those assumptions without verification. This introduces a high risk of error and misinterpretation. It demonstrates a lack of diligence and a disregard for the principle of data integrity, which is a cornerstone of professional conduct in data-driven roles. A further incorrect approach is to ignore the discrepancies altogether and submit the analysis as is, prioritizing speed over accuracy. This is a severe ethical and professional failing. It not only compromises the quality of work, but also breaches the trust placed in the analyst by both Genpact and its clients. Such an action can have significant reputational damage and lead to disciplinary action. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic approach to data analysis. When discrepancies are identified, the first step is to pause and investigate. This involves understanding the nature of the discrepancy, its potential causes, and its impact on the overall analysis. If manual intervention is necessary, it must be carefully controlled, documented, and validated. The decision-making process should prioritize data integrity and adherence to establish protocols over expediency. If time constraints are a genuine issue, the appropriate course of action is to communicate these challenges to the supervisor or project manager, seeking guidance or additional resources, rather than compromising the quality of the work. Question 8. Process analysis reveals that during a routine review of client financial data, you uncover a pattern of transactions that, while not definitively illegal, appear to be structured in a way that could be intended to circumvent reporting thresholds for suspicious activity. Your immediate supervisor, who is also the primary contact for this client, has been aware of these transactions and has not raised any concerns. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Ignore the transactions, assuming they are legitimate and that your supervisor has already vetted them, to avoid creating unnecessary conflict or jeopardizing the client relationship. Option B. Directly report your suspicions to the relevant financial regulatory authority, providing all the details you have gathered. Option C. Discuss your concerns directly with your supervisor to understand their perspective and the rationale behind the transaction structuring. Option D. Immediately escalate your findings to the firm's compliance department and request guidance on the appropriate next steps, while maintaining strict confidentiality of your findings until instructed otherwise. The correct answer is D. Immediately escalate your findings to the firm's compliance department and request guidance on the appropriate next steps, while maintaining strict confidentiality of your findings until instructed otherwise. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between maintaining client confidentiality and the obligation to report potential financial misconduct. The Genpact hiring assessment test, in its regulatory framework, emphasizes adherence to ethical codes and relevant financial regulations. Careful judgment is required to balance these competing duties without compromising professional integrity or legal standing. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a structured, compliant, and ethical response. By first consulting internal policies and seeking guidance from the compliance department, an individual demonstrates due diligence and adherence to established protocols designed to handle such sensitive situations. This aligns with regulatory expectations for reporting suspected financial irregularities, which often mandate internal reporting channels before external escalation. This approach ensures that any investigation is conducted systematically, protecting both the firm and the client from premature or unfounded accusations, while also fulfilling the ethical duty to act with integrity and prevent harm. An incorrect approach that involves directly reporting the suspicion to external authorities without internal consultation would be professionally unacceptable. This bypasses established internal control mechanisms and could lead to premature investigations, reputational damage to the client and the firm, and potential legal repercussions for violating confidentiality agreements or internal procedures. It demonstrates a lack of understanding of corporate governance and the proper channels for addressing financial concerns. Another incorrect approach, which is to ignore the suspicion due to fear of repercussions or a desire to avoid conflict, represents a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This inaction allows potential misconduct to continue unchecked, which can have severe consequences for all stakeholders, including the firm, its clients, and the broader financial system. It violates the fundamental ethical principle of acting with integrity and the regulatory obligation to report suspicious activities. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Recognizing the potential ethical or regulatory issue. 2. Consulting internal policies and procedures related to the suspected issue. 3. Seeking guidance from the appropriate internal department, e.g., compliance, legal, or a designated ethics officer. 4. Documenting all observations and actions taken. 5. Following the established internal reporting and escalation protocols. 6. If internal channels are exhausted or prove inadequate, then considering external reporting in accordance with regulatory requirements and legal advice. Question 9. Regulatory review indicates that a new financial product is being considered for launch by Genpact. This product involves complex derivative structures that have not been previously offered. The business development team believes the product has significant market potential and is eager to proceed quickly. What is the most appropriate initial step to ensure compliance with the regulatory framework governing Genpact's operations? Option A. Proceed with the launch of the new product, assuming that existing general compliance procedures will adequately cover any unforeseen regulatory requirements. Option B. Initiate a comprehensive review of the new product's structure and associated risks against all applicable regulations and internal policies involving the compliance department before any launch activities commence. Option C. Delay the formal compliance review until after the product has been launched and initial client feedback is received to address any identified issues retrospectively. Option D. Rely on the business development team's assurance that the product is compliant, as they have conducted preliminary market research. The correct answer is B. Initiate a comprehensive review of the new product's structure and associated risks against all applicable regulations and internal policies involving the compliance department before any launch activities commence. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in regulatory compliance where a new service offering, while potentially lucrative, carries significant risks if not properly vetted against existing regulations. The professional challenge lies in balancing business opportunity with the imperative to adhere to legal and ethical standards, ensuring client protection and maintaining the firm's integrity. The pressure to launch quickly can lead to overlooking critical compliance steps, making careful judgment and a thorough understanding of the regulatory landscape paramount. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a proactive and comprehensive review of the new service against the relevant regulatory framework. This includes identifying all applicable laws, guidelines, and internal policies. It necessitates engaging with the compliance department to assess potential risks, understand reporting obligations, and ensure appropriate controls are in place before launch. This represents best professional practice because it prioritizes adherence to the Genpact hiring assessment test's specified regulatory framework, thereby mitigating legal, financial, and reputational damage. It demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and client safeguarding, which are foundational to maintaining trust and operational integrity within the financial services industry. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to proceed with the launch based on a superficial understanding of the new service's regulatory implications, assuming existing general compliance measures are sufficient. This fails to acknowledge that new offerings often introduce novel risks or fall under specific, unaddressed regulatory provisions. This approach risks violating specific regulations, leading to potential fines, sanctions, and reputational harm. Another incorrect approach is to defer the compliance review until after the service has been launched, with the intention of addressing any issues retrospectively. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It demonstrates a disregard for the principle of compliance by design and places clients at immediate risk. Such a reactive stance can result in severe penalties, as regulatory bodies often view post-launch noncompliance more harshly. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on the sales or business development team's assessment of regulatory compliance, without independent verification from the compliance function. This creates a conflict of interest, as the sales team may be incentivized to downplay risks to secure the launch. This approach bypasses essential checks and balances, increasing the likelihood of regulatory breaches and undermining the firm's compliance culture. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic approach to new product or service launches. This involves 1. Early engagement with the compliance department to identify all relevant regulatory requirements. 2. Conducting a thorough risk assessment specific to the new offering. 3. Developing and implementing appropriate controls and procedures to ensure compliance. 4. Obtaining formal sign-off from compliance before launch. 5. Establishing ongoing monitoring and review mechanisms. This structured process ensures that business objectives are pursued responsibly and within the bounds of the law and ethical standards. Question 10. Risk assessment procedures indicate that Genpact is expanding its services into a new market with distinct data privacy regulations. The team responsible for client onboarding needs to process sensitive personal data of new clients located in this market. Which of the following actions best ensures regulatory compliance and mitigates potential risks? Option A. Proceed with onboarding using existing data handling protocols. assuming they are sufficient given the company's global compliance standards. Option B. Delegate the responsibility of understanding and adhering to the new market's data privacy laws to the local client onboarding team without providing specific training or resources. Option C. Begin processing the data while simultaneously initiating a research effort to understand the local data privacy regulations, with the intention of adjusting procedures if significant discrepancies are found. Option D. Immediately halt all client onboarding for this new market until a comprehensive legal review of the local data privacy laws is completed and integrated into operational procedures. The correct answer is A. Proceed with onboarding using existing data handling protocols, assuming they are sufficient given the company's global compliance standards. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for efficient data processing with the imperative of regulatory compliance, specifically concerning data privacy and security. The challenge lies in identifying and mitigating risks associated with handling sensitive client information in a new market without a comprehensive understanding of the local regulatory landscape. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the company's actions do not inadvertently lead to breaches of data protection laws, reputational damage, or financial penalties. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough understanding of the applicable regulatory framework before initiating data processing activities. This proactive stance ensures that all data handling procedures are designed to be compliant from the outset, minimizing the risk of future remediation efforts or legal repercussions. It demonstrates a commitment to ethical data stewardship and adherence to the principles of data protection, such as data minimization, purpose limitation, and security safeguards, which are fundamental to building trust with clients and regulators. An incorrect approach that involves proceeding with data processing based on assumptions about regulatory similarity would fail to meet the Know Your Customer and Know Your Jurisdiction principles inherent in regulatory compliance. This could lead to violations of specific data protection laws in the new market, such as inadequate consent mechanisms, improper cross-border data transfer protocols, or insufficient data security measures, all of which carry significant legal and financial penalties. Another incorrect approach, such as relying solely on the company's existing internal policies without verifying their alignment with local laws, ignores the principle that internal policies are secondary to external legal obligations. This could result in a false sense of security while actual noncompliance persists. A third incorrect approach, which involves delaying the assessment until a specific complaint arises, is reactive and fundamentally flawed, as it prioritizes damage control over proactive risk management and compliance, exposing the company to greater harm. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all relevant jurisdictions and their respective regulatory requirements. This should be followed by a comprehensive risk assessment that considers the nature of the data, the processing activities, and the potential impact of noncompliance. Implementing robust controls and procedures based on this assessment, and regularly reviewing and updating them in response to changes in regulations or business operations, forms a continuous cycle of compliance management. Question 11. Process analysis reveals a potential for significant cost savings and operational efficiency by automating a customer service function currently handled by a dedicated team. However, this automation would likely lead to the redundancy of this team, many of whom have been with the company for a considerable time and may face challenges in finding comparable employment. What is the most responsible and ethically sound approach to managing this situation? Option A. Implement the automation immediately to realize the cost savings, while offering the affected employees a standard severance package as per company policy. Option B. Automate the function and simultaneously launch a public relations campaign to highlight the company's commitment to technological advancement and efficiency. Option C. Delay the automation indefinitely due to the potential negative impact on employee morale and the risk of negative publicity. Option D. Conduct a thorough impact assessment of the automation on the affected employees. Explore alternative roles within the company for those who can be retrained, and engage in transparent communication with the team about the potential changes and support mechanisms. The correct answer is A. Implement the automation immediately to realize the cost savings, while offering the affected employees a standard severance package as per company policy. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in business process improvement where a proposed change, while seemingly efficient, could negatively impact a key stakeholder group. The challenge lies in balancing the drive for operational efficiency with the ethical and regulatory obligations to consider the impact on all affected parties, particularly those who rely on the current process for their livelihood or fair treatment. The need for careful judgment arises from the potential for unintended consequences and the importance of maintaining trust and compliance. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes a thorough impact assessment and proactive engagement with the affected stakeholders. This aligns with principles of good corporate governance and ethical business conduct, which often mandate consideration of stakeholder interests. In many regulatory frameworks, particularly those concerning consumer protection or fair business practices, failing to adequately assess and mitigate negative impacts on vulnerable groups can lead to regulatory scrutiny, fines, and reputational damage. This approach demonstrates a commitment to responsible innovation and a proactive stance on risk management, ensuring that efficiency gains do not come at the expense of fairness or compliance. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with the change without consulting the affected stakeholders. This demonstrates a disregard for their rights and potential hardships, which can be a direct violation of consumer protection laws or fair dealing regulations. Ethically, it represents a failure to uphold principles of transparency and fairness. Another incorrect approach is to conduct a superficial consultation that does not genuinely seek or incorporate stakeholder feedback. This can be seen as a token effort to meet a procedural requirement without substantive engagement. Regulators often look beyond mere consultation to the actual consideration and integration of feedback. Failure to do so can be interpreted as a lack of good faith and a potential breach of regulatory expectations for stakeholder engagement. A third incorrect approach is to dismiss stakeholder concerns by focusing solely on the cost savings or efficiency gains. This demonstrates a narrow, short-term perspective that ignores potential long-term risks, such as increased customer complaints, negative publicity, or even legal challenges. It also fails to recognize the broader ethical responsibility to operate in a manner that benefits society, not just the company's bottom line. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a stakeholder-centric approach to process analysis. This involves identifying all relevant stakeholders, understanding their perspectives and potential impacts, and engaging in meaningful dialogue. A structured decision-making process would include 1. Comprehensive stakeholder mapping, 2. Impact assessment, both positive and negative, 3. Development of mitigation strategies for negative impacts, 4. Transparent communication and consultation, and 5. Iterative refinement of the proposed change based on feedback. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are not only efficient, but also ethical, compliant, and sustainable. Question 12. Implementation of a client's request for a highly speculative investment strategy, which appears to contradict their stated risk tolerance and financial capacity, requires a financial advisor to. Option A. Propose a slightly modified version of the client's requested strategy that might mitigate some risks, but still largely aligns with the original speculative intent. Option B. Conduct a thorough assessment of the client's financial situation, risk tolerance, and investment objectives, and then clearly explain the potential risks and regulatory implications of the requested strategy, offering suitable alternatives if the request remains inappropriate. Option C. Immediately execute the client's requested investment strategy to ensure client satisfaction and avoid potential complaints. Option D. Inform the client that their request cannot be fulfilled due to regulatory restriction, without further explanation or discussion of alternatives. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough assessment of the client's financial situation, risk tolerance, and investment objectives, and then clearly explain the potential risks and regulatory implications of the requested strategy, offering suitable alternatives if the request remains inappropriate. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's immediate financial desires and the long-term sustainability and ethical implications of a proposed investment strategy. The financial advisor must navigate the client's pressure while upholding their fiduciary duty and adhering to regulatory requirements. The The challenge lies in balancing client satisfaction with responsible advice, especially when the client's request might lead to potential regulatory scrutiny or ethical breaches. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach demonstrates best professional practice by prioritizing the client's best interests, which includes their long-term financial well-being and protection from undue risk. This aligns with the core principles of fiduciary duty, requiring advisors to act with loyalty, care, and good faith. Specifically, it adheres to regulatory frameworks that mandate suitability and appropriateness of investments, ensuring that recommendations are aligned with the client's objectives, risk tolerance, and financial situation. Ethically, it upholds the principle of do no harm by avoiding recommendations that could lead to significant losses or regulatory penalties for the client. Incorrect approach is analysis. An approach that solely focuses on fulfilling the client's request without due diligence fails to meet the suitability requirements mandated by financial regulations. This could lead to the client making an inappropriate investment, resulting in financial harm and potential regulatory action against both the client and the advisor. Ethically, it breaches the duty of care and loyalty by prioritizing short-term client appeasement over their actual financial security. An approach that dismisses the client's request outright without proper explanation or exploration of alternatives can damage the client relationship and may not fully address the client's underlying motivations. While it avoids the immediate risk of an unsuitable investment, it fails to engage in constructive dialogue and may miss opportunities to educate the client or find a more appropriate solution that still meets some of their objectives. This can be seen as a failure in communication and client service, potentially leading to dissatisfaction and a perception of unresponsiveness. An approach that attempts to find a loophole or a slightly modified version of the client's risky request without fundamentally addressing the underlying issues of suitability and risk is also problematic. This can be interpreted as a form of gaming the system and may still expose the client to unacceptable risks or put the advisor in a position of facilitating potentially non-compliant activities. It lacks transparency and does not demonstrate a commitment to the client's true best interests. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process that begins with a thorough understanding of the client's objectives, risk tolerance, and financial capacity. This involves active listening and probing questions. Next, they must assess the proposed strategy against regulatory requirements and ethical standards, considering suitability, potential risks, and long-term implications. If the proposed strategy is unsuitable or poses undue risk, the professional should clearly and respectfully explain the concerns to the client, referencing relevant regulations and ethical principles. They should then offer alternative, suitable strategies that align with the client's goals. Documentation of all discussions, recommendations, and client decisions is crucial for compliance and professional accountability. Question 13. Quality control measures reveal a pattern of minor discrepancies in client onboarding documentation across several departments. While individually these discrepancies do not appear to pose an immediate threat, the frequency suggests a potential underlying systemic issue. What is the most appropriate next step in the risk assessment process? Option A. Classify the findings as low-priority operational errors and monitor them for a period to see if they resolve themselves. Option B. Focus on rectifying the specific documentation errors identified without investigating the broader departmental processes. Option C. Implement immediate, ad hoc training for the affected departments on documentation procedures to address the observed discrepancies. Option D. Conduct a thorough root cause analysis to identify the systemic factors contributing to the discrepancies and assess their potential impact on compliance and operational integrity. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough root cause analysis to identify the systemic factors contributing to the discrepancies and assess their potential impact on compliance and operational integrity. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a nuanced understanding of risk assessment methodologies beyond simple identification. The challenge lies in distinguishing between a superficial review and a robust, actionable risk assessment that aligns with regulatory expectations and ethical obligations. A failure to adequately assess and address identified risks can lead to regulatory noncompliance, financial penalties, reputational damage, and ultimately, harm to clients or the firm. The pressure to quickly address findings without a thorough understanding of their root causes and potential impact adds to the complexity. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic and thorough evaluation of the identified quality control findings to determine their underlying causes and potential impact. This aligns with the principles of effective risk management, which mandates not just identifying issues, but also assessing their significance and developing appropriate mitigation strategies. Regulatory frameworks, such as those governing financial services or data protection, often require firms to have robust risk assessment processes in place to identify, evaluate, and manage risks proactively. This approach demonstrates due diligence, a commitment to operational integrity, and a responsible approach to managing potential threats. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately implementing superficial fixes without understanding the root cause of the quality control issues. This fails to address the systemic weaknesses that led to the problems, making it likely that similar issues will recur. Ethically, this demonstrates a lack of commitment to genuine improvement and a disregard for the potential ongoing risks. From a regulatory perspective, this approach often falls short of requirements for effective risk management and internal controls, which demand a deeper analysis of control failures. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the findings as minor or isolated incidents without proper investigation. This is a direct contravention of the principle of proactive risk management. Regulatory bodies expect firms to take all identified control weaknesses seriously and to assess their potential impact, even if they appear minor individually. Ignoring or downplaying such findings can be interpreted as a deliberate attempt to avoid necessary remediation, leading to potential sanctions for inadequate risk oversight. A third incorrect approach is to focus solely on the immediate operational impact of the findings, without considering the broader strategic or reputational risks. While operational efficiency is important, a comprehensive risk assessment must consider all dimensions of risk. Failing to do so can leave the firm vulnerable to unforeseen consequences, such as a loss of client trust or regulatory scrutiny for failing to manage all material risks. This approach lacks the holistic perspective required for effective enterprise-wide risk management. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach quality control findings with a mindset of continuous improvement and a commitment to robust risk management. The decision-making process should involve 1. Acknowledging and documenting all findings. 2. Conducting a root cause analysis to understand why the issues occurred. 3. Assessing the potential impact and likelihood of each risk. 4. Developing and implementing proportionate mitigation plans. 5. Monitoring the effectiveness of these plans and reporting on progress. This structured approach ensures that risks are managed effectively and in accordance with regulatory and ethical standards. Question 14. The evaluation methodology shows a proposed process optimization for a client's customer onboarding workflow that aims to significantly reduce processing time and operational costs. The proposed changes involve automating several manual data entry steps and streamlining the document verification process. However, initial simulations indicate a potential for a slight increase in data discrepancies if the automation is not perfectly calibrated, and the streamlined verification might reduce the human oversight that currently catches some errors. Which of the following approaches best represents a responsible and effective strategy for implementing this process optimization? Option A. Delay the implementation indefinitely due to the identified potential for data discrepancies, opting to maintain the current, less efficient process to avoid any risk of error, even if it means foregoing potential benefits. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive pilot program in a controlled environment for a subset of the onboarding processes. This pilot would include rigorous testing of the automated steps, validation of data accuracy against manual checks, and training for the operational team on the new system, with a phased rollout based on successful pilot outcomes. Option C. Implement the automated solution immediately across all onboarding processes to realize the cost savings and efficiency gains as quickly as possible, with a plan to address any data discrepancies that arise post-implementation. Option D. Focus solely on the cost reduction aspect of the optimization, implementing the automation with minimal testing, and relying on the client's existing quality control measures to catch any errors, assuming they are sufficient. The correct answer is C. Implement the automated solution immediately across all onboarding processes to realize the cost savings and efficiency gains as quickly as possible, with a plan to address any data discrepancies that arise post-implementation. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows a scenario where a process optimization initiative is underway, aiming to improve efficiency in a Genpact client's customer onboarding process. The challenge lies in balancing the need for speed and cost reduction with the imperative to maintain data accuracy and regulatory compliance, particularly concerning sensitive customer information. A hasty implementation without proper validation could lead to significant operational risks and potential breaches of data privacy regulations. The correct approach emphasizes a phased rollout with rigorous testing and validation at each stage. This aligns with best professional practices by ensuring that any optimization does not compromise the integrity of the data or the security of customer information. It demonstrates a commitment to responsible innovation, where improvements are implemented cautiously and with a focus on mitigating risks. This approach is ethically sound as it prioritizes client trust and customer data protection, which are fundamental to maintaining business relationships and adhering to data protection principles. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate cost savings by bypassing thorough testing and validation would be professionally unacceptable. This would represent a failure to uphold due diligence and a disregard for potential negative consequences, such as data errors or security vulnerabilities. Such an approach could lead to regulatory penalties if data privacy laws are violated, and would severely damage the client's trust and Genpact's reputation. Another incorrect approach might involve implementing a complex technological solution without adequate training for the operational teams. This overlooks the human element in process optimization and can lead to increased errors, reduced efficiency, and employee frustration, negating the intended benefits. Ethically, it fails to support the workforce through change, potentially creating an environment of distrust and inefficiency. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough risk assessment before any changes are implemented. This includes identifying potential impacts on data integrity, security, compliance, and employee performance. A structured approach, such as a pilot program followed by incremental rollout, allows for continuous monitoring and adjustment, ensuring that the optimization efforts are effective and responsible. Professionals must always consider the broader implications of their decisions, prioritizing ethical conduct and regulatory adherence alongside efficiency gains. Question 15. Process analysis reveals that a client, who is a novice investor, has requested to invest a significant portion of their portfolio in a highly speculative, unregistered security that has been promoted through aggressive social media campaigns. The client expresses strong conviction based on anecdotal evidence and a desire for rapid, substantial returns. The professional has identified significant risks associated with this type of investment, including lack of liquidity, potential for fraud, and non-compliance with standard regulatory disclosure requirements. Option A. Advise the client against the investment, clearly explaining the regulatory risks, lack of due diligence, and potential for significant financial loss, while offering to explore alternative regulated investment opportunities that align with their risk tolerance and financial goals. Option B. Execute the investment as requested by the client, assuming the client understands the risks and is solely responsible for their investment decisions, to maintain a positive client relationship. Option C. Proceed with the investment but include a disclaimer in the agreement stating that the professional is not liable for any losses incurred, as the client insisted on the investment. Option D. Inform the client that the requested investment is not permissible and immediately terminate the professional relationship without further explanation. The correct answer is A. Advise the client against the investment, clearly explaining the regulatory risks, lack of due diligence, and potential for significant financial loss, while offering to explore alternative regulated investment opportunities that align with their risk tolerance and financial goals. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's explicit, albeit potentially misguided, request and the professional's ethical obligation to act in the client's best interest and adhere to regulatory standards. The pressure to maintain client relationships can create a temptation to comply with the request, even if it carries risks. Careful judgment is required to balance client satisfaction with professional integrity and regulatory compliance. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes ethical conduct and regulatory adherence over immediate client appeasement. By seeking clarification and explaining the potential risks and regulatory implications, the professional demonstrates a commitment to transparency, client welfare, and upholding the integrity of financial advice. This aligns with the core principles of professional conduct, which mandate acting with honesty, diligence, and in the best interests of the client, while also respecting the boundaries set by relevant regulations. An incorrect approach that involves directly fulfilling the client's request without further inquiry would be professionally unacceptable. This would constitute a failure to exercise due diligence and professional skepticism, potentially leading to regulatory breaches and harm to the client. It would also undermine the professional's credibility and fiduciary duty. Another incorrect approach, such as dismissing the client's request outright without explanation or offering alternatives, could damage the client relationship and fail to educate the client about the underlying issues, thus not serving their long-term interests. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the client's request and its underlying motivations. This should be followed by an assessment of the request against ethical principles, professional standards, and applicable regulations. If a conflict arises, the professional should engage in open and honest communication with the client, explaining the concerns and potential consequences. The goal is to find a solution that is both compliant and beneficial to the client, even if it means advising against their initial preference. Question 16. Investigation of a tax advisory firm's response to a client's request for a complex international tax structure that appears to exploit loopholes in two different tax jurisdictions, where the client insists on its legality and urgency. Option A. Conduct a comprehensive review of the proposed tax structure against the specific tax laws, regulations, and official guidance of both relevant jurisdictions, documenting all findings and advising the client on the legal standing and potential risks. Option B. Proceed with implementing the tax structure as requested by the client, relying on the client's assurance that it is legal and the need to maintain a strong client relationship. Option C. Implement the tax structure, but only after obtaining a written indemnity from the client, assuming all future liabilities. Option D. Advise the client that the proposed structure is too risky and immediately withdraw from the engagement, without further investigation or explanation. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive review of the proposed tax structure against the specific tax laws, regulations, and official guidance of both relevant jurisdictions, documenting all findings and advising the client on the legal standing and potential risks. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's desire for aggressive tax planning and the firm's obligation to adhere to tax laws and ethical standards. The pressure to retain a high-value client can lead to compromised judgment, making it crucial to prioritize regulatory compliance and professional integrity over short-term financial gains. The complexity of international tax regulations adds another layer of difficulty, requiring meticulous attention to detail and a thorough understanding of applicable laws. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the proposed tax strategy against all relevant tax legislation and guidance in both jurisdictions. This demonstrates best professional practice by prioritizing legal compliance and ethical conduct. It aligns with the fundamental duty of tax professional to provide advice that is not only tax efficient, but also legally sound and sustainable. This approach upholds the reputation of the firm and the profession by ensuring that client engagements are conducted with integrity and a commitment to lawful practices. It also mitigates the risk of penalties, reputational damage, and professional sanctions for both the client and the firm. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with the tax strategy based solely on the client's assertion of its legality, without independent verification. This is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. It breaches the professional duty of care and diligence, as it abdicates responsibility for ensuring compliance. Such an approach risks facilitating tax evasion or aggressive tax avoidance schemes that could be deemed illegal, leading to severe penalties for the client and potential disciplinary action against the professional. Another incorrect approach is to implement the strategy without fully understanding the implications in the second jurisdiction, relying on assumptions or incomplete information. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to meet the standard of professional competence. It exposes both the client and the firm to unforeseen tax liabilities, penalties, and legal challenges. Ethically, it is unacceptable to provide advice that is not based on a comprehensive understanding of all relevant legal frameworks. A third incorrect approach is to dismiss the client's concerns about the legality of the strategy without a proper review, simply because the client is insistent. While the client's wishes are important, they do not supersede legal and ethical obligations. This approach shows a lack of professional judgment and a failure to engage constructively with the client's concerns. It could lead to the loss of a client, but more importantly, it represents a missed opportunity to educate the client on compliant tax planning and to uphold professional standards. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a framework that begins with understanding the client's objectives. This is followed by a rigorous assessment of the proposed strategy against all applicable laws and regulations in every relevant jurisdiction. If any part of the strategy appears questionable or potentially non-compliant, the professional must conduct further research, seek expert opinions if necessary, and clearly communicate the risks and legal implications to the client. The ultimate decision must be to advise on strategies that are both effective and fully compliant with the law, even if it means advising against a client's preferred but potentially unlawful course of action. Question 17. What factors determine the scope and depth of an impact assessment for a new digital service that processes customer financial data, considering potential risks to data privacy and fair treatment? Option A. The projected revenue generated by the new digital service and the speed at which it can be launched to gain market advantage. Option B. The availability of existing IT infrastructure and the cost of implementing basic security protocols. Option C. The sensitivity of the financial data being processed, the potential for discriminatory outcomes from algorithmic decision-making, and the likelihood of unauthorized access or data breaches. Option D. The number of marketing channels used to promote the new digital service and the anticipated customer acquisition cost. Correct answer is C. The sensitivity of the financial data being processed, the potential for discriminatory outcomes from algorithmic decision-making, and the likelihood of unauthorized access or data breaches. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge in assessing the potential impact of a new product launch on an existing customer base, particularly concerning data privacy and fair treatment. The professional must balance business objectives with regulatory compliance and ethical considerations. The difficulty lies in anticipating all potential negative consequences, quantifying them where possible, and developing mitigation strategies that are both effective and compliant with the relevant regulatory framework. A failure to conduct a thorough impact assessment can lead to regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic and comprehensive evaluation of potential impacts across various dimensions. This includes identifying all data processing activities associated with the new product, assessing the sensitivity of the data involved, and determining the potential risks to individuals' rights and freedoms. It requires considering both direct and indirect consequences, such as the possibility of data breaches, unauthorized access, or discriminatory outcomes due to algorithmic bias. The process should involve cross-functional teams, including legal, compliance, IT, and business units, to ensure all perspectives are considered. This aligns with the principles of data protection by design and by default, as mandated by regulations like the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. If this were a relevant jurisdiction, the assessment should lead to the implementation of appropriate safeguards, such as data minimization, pseudonymization, and robust security measures, to mitigate identified risks. Incorrect approaches analysis. Focusing solely on the immediate financial benefits of the product launch without a thorough consideration of data privacy risks is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach neglects the fundamental obligation to protect personal data and individuals' rights, potentially leading to breaches of data protection laws and substantial fines. It demonstrates a disregard for the principle of accountability, which requires organizations to be able to demonstrate compliance with data protection principles. Prioritizing speed to market over a comprehensive impact assessment, even with the intention of addressing issues later, is also professionally unacceptable. This reactive approach increases the likelihood of unforeseen negative consequences and can result in significant remediation efforts and potential regulatory scrutiny. It fails to uphold the proactive and preventative nature of robust impact assessments, which are designed to identify and mitigate risks before they materialize, limiting the impact assessment to only the most obvious or easily quantifiable risks, while ignoring potential indirect or systemic effects is another form of failure. This narrow focus can lead to a false sense of security and leave the organization vulnerable to less apparent but equally damaging consequences, such as reputational harm or erosion of customer trust due to perceived unfairness or lack of transparency. It falls short of the comprehensive due diligence required to ensure responsible innovation and compliance. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach to impact assessment. This involves identifying potential harms, assessing their likelihood and severity, and prioritizing mitigation efforts accordingly. The process should be iterative, with regular reviews and updates as the product evolves or new information becomes available. Engaging stakeholders, including legal counsel and data protection officers, early in the process is crucial. Documenting the entire assessment process, including the rationale for decisions made and the mitigation strategies implemented, is essential for demonstrating accountability and compliance. Question 18. When evaluating the implementation of a new customer relationship management (CRM) system that will migrate significant volumes of sensitive customer data, what is the most appropriate approach to ensure compliance with data privacy regulations and mitigate associated risks? Option A. Assume that the new CRM system's vendor has ensured all necessary data privacy compliance, and therefore no further internal assessment or action is required beyond the basic data transfer. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive data privacy impact assessment (DPIA) prior to migration, identifying risks and implementing appropriate mitigation strategies, including data anonymization where possible and secure transfer protocols. Option C. Proceed with the migration using existing security protocols, assuming they are sufficient for the new system, and address any identified privacy issues after the migration is complete. Option D. Prioritize the speed and cost-effectiveness of the migration by transferring data using the quickest available methods, even if they involve less robust security measures, to meet project deadlines. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive data privacy impact assessment (DPIA) prior to migration, identifying risks and implementing appropriate mitigation strategies, including data anonymization where possible and secure transfer protocols. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common implementation challenge in financial services, balancing the need for efficient data processing with the imperative to comply with stringent data privacy regulations. The challenge lies in identifying and mitigating risks associated with handling sensitive customer information during a system migration. A misstep can lead to significant regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. The pressure to meet project deadlines can create a temptation to cut corners, making robust governance and risk assessment crucial. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a proactive, risk-based strategy that prioritizes data security and regulatory compliance throughout the migration process. This entails conducting a thorough data privacy impact assessment (DPIA) before the migration begins. The DPIA identifies potential risks to personal data, evaluates their likelihood and impact, and outlines mitigation measures. This aligns with the principles of data protection by design and by default, as mandated by regulations like the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, if this were a relevant jurisdiction. It ensures that privacy considerations are embedded into the project from the outset, rather than being an afterthought. Implementing robust data anonymization or pseudonymization techniques where feasible and ensuring secure data transfer protocols are key components of this approach. Regular audits and ongoing monitoring post-migration further solidify compliance. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to proceed with the migration without a formal data privacy impact assessment, relying solely on existing, potentially outdated, security protocols. This fails to identify new or amplified risks introduced by the migration itself, such as increased data accessibility or new processing activities. It violates the principle of accountability and proactive risk management, as regulators expect organizations to demonstrate they have considered and addressed privacy risks. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize speed and cost efficiency over data security by transferring data in an unencrypted format or using less secure methods to expedite the process. This directly contravenes data protection principles that mandate appropriate technical and organizational measures to ensure data security. Such an approach exposes personal data to unauthorized access or breaches, leading to severe regulatory sanctions and potential legal liabilities. A third incorrect approach is to assume that compliance is achieved simply by migrating data to a new system, without verifying the new system's compliance posture or updating internal data handling policies. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to ensure that the entire data lifecycle, from collection to storage and processing in the new environment, remains compliant. It neglects the ongoing responsibility to maintain data protection standards. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured, risk-aware decision-making process. This begins with understanding the regulatory landscape relevant to the data being handled. Next, comprehensive risk assessment, including a DPIA, should be conducted to identify potential privacy issues. Based on this assessment, a mitigation strategy should be developed, prioritizing data protection by design and default. Implementation should involve secure technical solutions and clear operational procedures. Finally, ongoing monitoring and regular reviews are essential to ensure sustained compliance and adapt to evolving risks and regulations. Question 19. Stakeholder feedback indicates that the current customer onboarding process is experiencing significant delays, leading to a negative impact on new client acquisition and satisfaction. The team is tasked with optimizing this process. Which of the following approaches best addresses this challenge, while adhering to operational best practices and regulatory expectations in a financial services context? Option A. Focus solely on reducing the number of required documents and information gathering steps to shorten the process, without a comprehensive review of the impact on compliance checks. Option B. Conduct a thorough analysis of the existing process to identify bottlenecks and root causes of delays, develop targeted solutions based on this analysis, and implement and test these solutions iteratively with clear metrics for success. Option C. Reassign existing staff to new roles within the onboarding team to increase capacity, without analyzing the specific skills required or the efficiency of the current workflow. Option D. Immediately implement a new, fully automated onboarding system to eliminate manual steps and speed up the process, assuming that automation inherently leads to efficiency. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough analysis of the existing process to identify bottlenecks and root causes of delays, develop targeted solutions based on this analysis, and implement and test these solutions iteratively with clear metrics for success. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for efficiency improvements with the potential impact on customer experience and data integrity, all within the operational context of a financial services firm. The core of the challenge lies in identifying process optimization strategies that deliver tangible benefits without compromising regulatory compliance or customer trust. Careful judgment is required to select an approach that is both effective and responsible. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic, data-driven methodology for process optimization. This involves understanding the current state, identifying root causes of inefficiencies, and then designing and implementing solutions that are tested and validated. This aligns with principles of good governance and operational risk management, which are paramount in regulated industries. By focusing on measurable outcomes and stakeholder alignment, this approach ensures that optimization efforts are aligned with business objectives and regulatory expectations, such as those related to data accuracy and customer service standards. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering the downstream impact on service quality or data accuracy would be professionally unacceptable. This could lead to regulatory breaches if, for example, reduced staffing or automated processes result in errors in financial reporting or inadequate customer complaint handling, which are often subject to specific regulatory oversight. Another incorrect approach that involves implementing changes without proper testing or validation risks introducing new inefficiencies or compliance issues, potentially violating principles of due diligence and sound operational management. A third incorrect approach that bypasses stakeholder consultation, particularly with those directly involved in the process or impacted by it, undermines transparency and can lead to resistance and failed implementation, which is contrary to ethical business practices and effective change management. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the problem or opportunity. This involves gathering comprehensive data, engaging relevant stakeholders to gain diverse perspectives, and identifying potential solutions. Each potential solution should then be evaluated against key criteria, including efficiency gains, cost-effectiveness, impact on customer experience, data integrity, and regulatory compliance. The chosen approach should be piloted, monitored, and iterated upon to ensure successful and sustainable implementation. Question 20. Market research demonstrates that the financial services industry is increasingly exposed to a complex web of evolving risks, including technological disruptions, geopolitical instability, and changing regulatory landscapes. A firm is developing its annual risk assessment framework. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory expectations for a comprehensive and effective risk management program? Option A. Prioritizing the identification and assessment of risks based on their potential impact and likelihood, incorporating both historical data and forward-looking analysis, and establishing a continuous monitoring and reassessment process. Option B. Attempting to identify and quantify every conceivable risk, no matter how minor, to ensure absolute comprehensiveness in the assessment. Option C. Relying solely on a third-party risk assessment report without internal validation or integration into the firm's operational context. Option D. Focusing exclusively on risks that have materialized in the past 5 years, as this historical data provides the most reliable basis for future risk prediction. The correct answer is A. Prioritizing the identification and assessment of risks based on their potential impact and likelihood, incorporating both historical data and forward-looking analysis, and establishing a continuous monitoring and reassessment process. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for proactive risk identification with the practical constraints of resource allocation and the potential for over-analysis. The firm must develop a robust risk assessment framework that is both comprehensive and efficient, avoiding the pitfalls of either neglecting emerging threats or becoming paralyzed by an exhaustive, unmanageable list of potential risks. Careful judgment is required to prioritize risks based on their likelihood and potential impact, ensuring that resources are directed towards the most critical areas. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it involves a systematic and layered methodology for risk assessment. It begins with broad identification of potential risks across various business functions, followed by a more detailed analysis of their likelihood and impact. Crucially, it incorporates a feedback loop for continuous monitoring and reassessment, aligning with regulatory expectations for ongoing risk management. This approach ensures that the firm remains agile and responsive to evolving threats, demonstrating a commitment to sound governance and regulatory compliance. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of a robust internal control framework, which regulators expect to be dynamic and adaptive. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on historical data without considering emerging trends fails to meet regulatory expectations for forward-looking risk assessment. Regulators expect firms to anticipate future risks, not just react to past ones. This approach would be ethically deficient as it could lead to a false sense of security and leave the firm vulnerable to unforeseen events. Another incorrect approach that attempts to quantify every conceivable risk, regardless of its materiality, is inefficient and impractical. While thoroughness is important, an overly granular approach can lead to resource misallocation and a lack of focus on the most significant threats. This can be seen as a failure in professional judgment and potentially a breach of fiduciary duty if it distracts from managing material risks. A third incorrect approach that relies solely on external consultants without integrating internal knowledge and expertise is also problematic. While external perspectives are valuable, a truly effective risk assessment must be grounded in the firm's specific operational realities and internal control environment. Over-reliance on external parties can lead to a disconnect between the assessment and the firm's actual risk profile, potentially failing to identify unique internal vulnerabilities. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, clearly define the scope and objectives of the risk assessment. Second, engage relevant stakeholders from across the organization to gather diverse perspectives. Third, employ a combination of qualitative and quantitative methods, prioritizing those that provide the most actionable insights. Fourth, establish clear criteria for risk prioritization and mitigation. Finally, ensure that the risk assessment process is integrated into the firm's overall strategic planning and operational management, with regular reviews and updates.